The hills of Vermont stretch for miles in every direction. Bare oak trees, stone walls, a sky the color of old iron pressing down on all of it. And on the highest hill outside, a town small enough to miss a building that stops you cold. A granary, 3 stories, old timber gone silver with age, covered floor to ceiling, edge to edge in dog tags. Thousands of them. Aluminum, handmade, hanging on wire and cord, catching the morning light like something between a memorial and a warning. The wind moves through them, and they ring quiet, patient, the sound of names that refuse to disappear. A man stands in front of it, field jacket, dog tags of his own against his chest. A husky sitting at his left heel, one eye blue, one eye brown, both of them watching the wall. He holds a key. His hand isn't moving. And somewhere behind him, a lawyer is waiting. His children don't know he's here. His wife has been gone 45 days, and she built this for him before she died. The dog noticed it first. Boone stopped walking, just stopped. Right there on the cracked sidewalk outside the law office, one paw lifted, nose tilted up. Those mismatched eyes locked onto something Garrett couldn't see. Garrett didn't question it anymore. 16 years in the Army had taught him to trust instincts. 4 years with a husky had taught him the same thing, just louder and with more fur. He stood still, waited. Nothing came. Just Vermont in October. Just dead leaves skipping across the pavement. Just the weight of a manila envelope under his arm that felt heavier than his ruck ever did downrange. He looked down at Boone. Boone looked up at him. One ice blue eye, one warm brown. Both of them saying the same thing. You already know what's in that envelope. Garrett Malone was 42 years old. He had cleared buildings in Kandahar. He had pulled a teammate out of a burning vehicle outside Mosul. He had stood at attention while a general pinned a bronze star to his chest and said words that blurred together because all Garrett could think about was the man who should have been standing next to him and wasn't. He was not a man who scared easily. But that envelope. That envelope had been sitting on the passenger seat of his F-250 for 6 days. He'd driven it from Burlington to Calder, from Calder to Montpelier. He'd parked outside a diner in Barre and stared at it for 40 minutes before ordering coffee he didn't drink. Because inside that envelope was the name of a lawyer, Nora's lawyer. And Nora had been gone for 45 days. He met her on a Thursday. Fort Campbell, Kentucky. The legal aid office in a prefab building that smelled like burned coffee and fluorescent light. Garrett had gone in because his buddy Reese had a lease dispute and couldn't read the fine print fast enough. Garrett could read fine print. He just hadn't planned on the woman sitting behind the desk. She had dark hair pinned up wrong, like she'd done it in a car. Pen behind one ear, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and she was frowning at a document like it had personally offended her, which he would learn later was her normal face. Not a resting face, an active face. The face of a woman who had decided that most paperwork was a moral failing on somebody's part. She looked up, brown eyes, direct, no performance. Can I help you? And Garrett, who had brief colonels who had stood in rooms where decisions had weight, completely forgot what he was there for. Reese had to elbow him. Her full name was Lenora Claire Ashford, but she went by Nora. And she was the kind of woman who went by Nora because Lenora felt like someone else's idea of who she should be, and Nora had very little patience for other people's ideas of who she should be. He figured that out on their third date. When she told him quietly and without drama that her father had offered her $100,000 to stop seeing him, she said it the way you'd mention the weather. He offered me money to end this. Garrett set down his fork. What did you say I said I'd consider it if he threw in the beach house? She was smiling when she said it, that small, sideways smile that he would spend the next 14 years looking for every time she walked into a room. You're not serious. No. She picked up her fork again. I told him no. Obviously. And then I told him that if he brought it up again, I'd move to Alaska. Would you? She looked at him then. Really looked. For the right reason, she said. Yeah. Douglas Ashford did not approve of Garrett Malone. This was not a secret. Douglas operated in a world where disapproval was a management tool, and he used it with the precision of someone who had never once been told no by anyone he outranked. He was old Vermont money, real old, the kind of family whose name was on a hospital wing and a library and a scholarship fund, and who somehow managed to make charity feel like a transaction. He called Garrett the soldier in early conversations, like a category, like a species. "How is the soldier doing?" he'd ask Nora. Not unkindly, just distantly, the way you'd ask about someone else's unusual pet. Nora stopped bringing Garrett to family dinners after the second one. Not because Garrett couldn't handle it, because she couldn't stand watching her father not even try. "He'll come around," Garrett said once on the drive home. Nora was quiet for a long time. "My father doesn't come around," she said finally. "He reassesses his position based on new strategic information. You'd have to become worth something to him before he'd bother. And you're worth everything to me." She looked out the window. "Which makes you worthless to him. That's not a problem you can fix. He married her anyway." Small ceremony. A judge. Floyd Greer as witness. Floyd, who had known Nora since she was 7 years old, who ran the blacksmith shop in Calder and had hands like sledgehammers and a voice like gravel rolling downhill. The Ashfords were not invited. Garrett's parents drove up from Georgia. His mother cried. His father shook Floyd's hand and said, "Good man," and Floyd said, "I know," and that was the whole reception. Wren came first, 4 minutes ahead of her brother, which she would never let him forget. Beckett came second, eyes already open, already looking around like he was assessing the situation and finding it acceptable. They were 10 now, 10 years old and sitting in the back seat of a diesel truck in the parking lot of a law office in Burlington, Vermont, with a husky between them who kept trying to put his head in Beckett's lap, and Beckett kept pushing it away, and Boone kept putting it back. Wren had her sketchbook. Of course she did. She drew when she was nervous, drew when she was sad, drew when she was happy, but also when she was the particular kind of quiet that came after something large had happened and hadn't finished happening yet. She was drawing now. Garrett watched them in the rearview mirror before he got out of the truck. Wren's pencil moving, Beckett's jaw set. Boone's massive head finally winning the battle for lap space. They looked so much like Nora, it made his chest hurt. "Wait here," he said. "I'll be 20 minutes. Beckett looked up. "Is this about Mom?" "Yeah." "Okay." That was it. That was Beckett at 10. "Okay. Let me know. I'll hold down the fort." Garrett got out of the truck. Boone immediately moved to the window to watch him go. He had been inside the house on Dunmore Road for 9 years. Not their house. That was the thing. That was the detail Garrett hadn't known, hadn't thought to ask, hadn't realized needed asking, because Nora handled the finances. Not because she didn't trust him, because she was better at it, because numbers made sense to her the way wood grain made sense to him, instinctive, readable, a language learned young. She paid the bills, she dealt with the accounts, she handled the taxes and the insurance and the quarterly this and that. And somewhere in all of that, she had never mentioned that the house on Dunmore Road was owned by the Ashford Family Trust, that Nora had usage rights, that usage rights died with the user. He found out on a Tuesday. The knock came at 7 in the morning. Sharp, official, the kind of knock that doesn't apologize for itself. Douglas Ashford stood on the porch in a wool overcoat. His lawyer stood one step behind. A notary stood one step behind that. 3 men on a porch at 7 in the morning. Garrett didn't say anything, just looked at them. "May we come in?" Douglas said. No, he would not be coming in. Garrett stepped outside instead and closed the door behind him. Boone nosed through before it shut, sat down next to Garrett's left leg, looked at Douglas with those mismatched eyes. Douglas cleared his throat. "The property at Dunmore Road is held in trust," he said. "Nora had lifetime usage rights. Those rights weren't transferable by the terms of the agreement. We've given the matter time out of respect for the grieving process, but how long?" Douglas paused. 72 hours would be, "How long have you known you were going to do this?" Silence. And Garrett understood then. He understood completely. The wool coat, the lawyer, the notary. This wasn't spontaneous. This wasn't grief reshaping itself into logistics. This was a plan. This had always been a plan. The only variable was the timing. He had been a guest in his own home for 9 years, and no one had told him. 72 hours, he said. Yes. We get off my porch. He told Wren and Beckett that evening. After dinner, after dishes, after Boone had done his nightly circuit of the house, checking each room, making sure everything was still where it was supposed to be. They sat at the kitchen table. Garrett put his hands flat on the wood. Good table. He'd built it himself. Solid oak. Mortise and tenon joints, no fasteners. It would last 100 years. He couldn't take it with him. We have to move, he said. We're going to a town called Calder. Your mom grew up there. There's a man named Floyd who knew her when she was your age. Wren looked up from her sketchbook. Why do we have to move? The house belongs to Grandpa Douglas. Beckett said nothing. His face did the thing where every emotion went very still, and he processed in private in whatever locked room inside himself he'd built for exactly this purpose. All of our stuff, Wren asked. What we can fit in the truck. She looked down at her sketchbook, then back up. Her eyes were Nora's eyes, dark and direct and already 2 steps ahead. Can I bring my paints? Yes, sweetheart. You can bring your paints. The morning they left, Sylvia Ashford called. Garrett had been carrying boxes for 6 hours. His hands were dirty. His back hurt. He had already made 2 trips to the storage unit and come back for the 3rd, and his phone was on the kitchen counter buzzing against the laminate. Sylvia Ashford, Douglas's wife, Nora's mother. He almost didn't answer. He answered. Garrett. Her voice was careful, precise, like she was reading from something. I want you to know this isn't personal. He set down the box he was carrying. Slowly. I'm sorry, the property arrangement. This is simply a matter of estate management. It was always going to happen this way. Nora knew, did she? A pause, small, but he caught it. She knew the terms of the trust, Sylvia said, recovering. She should have Mrs. Ashford. Garrett kept his voice flat. Even. The voice he used when everything inside him was moving very fast, and he needed the outside to be completely still. I'm going to stop you there. I just wanted you to understand. I understand fine. He picked the box back up. Don't call this number again. He hung up, stood in the empty kitchen, listened to the sound of his own breathing. Boone padded in from the hallway, sat down next to him. Yeah, Garrett said. Me too. The second piece of bad news arrived 3 days later. He was in Calder by then. Floyd's place, a converted equipment shed behind the blacksmith shop, insulated, heated, basically sound. 2 rooms and a bathroom. Enough. Floyd brought the papers himself, in person, which meant it was bad. Legal courier dropped these at my shop, he said. He set them on the table without elaborating. Garrett opened the envelope. Sylvia and Douglas Ashford petitioners. Emergency motion for temporary custody of minor children. Wren Claire Malone and Beckett James Malone. Grounds custodial, parent lacks stable housing. Verifiable income, educational continuity. He read it twice. Then he set it down. Put his palms flat on the table. Focused on the grain of the wood. Floyd. Yeah, they're going after the kids. Floyd sat down across from him. He was 73 years old. He had the kind of face that had seen enough that very little surprised it anymore. But his eyes were serious. I know, he said. This isn't about housing. This isn't about income. No, Floyd said. It never was. And then he explained, carefully, the way you explain something to a man who is still in the room, but only barely. The Ashford estate. The old trust document Douglas's father had written in 1987. The clause about grandchildren, the clause about guardianship, the clause that meant whoever raised Wren and Beckett would have significant influence over how the Ashford assets were managed during the 18 years before the twins turned 25. $230 million. Not love, Not grief, not family, money. Garrett sat with that for a while. Just sat. The shed was quiet except for the sound of the wind, and from outside the muffled clang of something metal in Floyd's shop. She knew, Garrett said finally. Nora. She knew they'd do this. He looked up. She said something. Before she said they'd try. She said they wouldn't wait long. She said he stopped, pressed two fingers against his mouth. She said I'd know what to do. Floyd looked at him for a long moment. Did she say anything else? Garrett was quiet. She said I'd find a granary on a hill outside of town. He shook his head slowly. I thought she was on the pain medication. Floyd didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice was very careful. She wasn't. The children adapted the way children do, which is to say they adapted in ways that looked nothing like adapting but were. Calder was a small town, 2,400 people. One main street, one diner, one school that ran K through 8 before the kids bused to the regional high school in Morrisville. A place where a new face got noticed, where a man with a husky and two quiet kids in a truck that needed a new muffler got noticed twice. They enrolled at Calder Elementary on a Wednesday. Beckett assessed the situation on the walk from the truck to the front door and declared it acceptable. He did this by going very quiet and keeping his eyes moving, which Garrett recognized from his own deployment behavior and found both impressive and slightly alarming in a 10-year-old. Wren brought her sketchbook. Her teacher, a woman named Mrs. Aldrich, who wore cardigans and had the patience of someone who had made a deliberate choice to have patience, called Garrett that evening. Your daughter drew 14 pictures today, she said. Is that... It's fine. She's extraordinary. I just wanted you to know she uses a lot of dark colors right now. That's okay. That's what she needs. Her mother just died. I know. Mrs. Aldrich was quiet for a moment. The drawings are about that. But they're also about her house. She keeps drawing a house that's getting brighter as she goes. I thought you'd want to know. Garrett thanked her, hung up, looked out the shed window at the dark sky over Calder. Wren was brighter in her pictures than she was in person, which meant she could see it even when she couldn't feel it yet. He'd take it. He found work fast. There was always work for a man who could build things and didn't need to be told how. Calder and the surrounding towns had old houses and steep winters and 100 small projects that had been waiting for the right hands. He fixed a collapsed porch on Miller Road, replaced the support beams in the basement of the Presbyterian church, rebuilt a stone wall behind the Vasquez property that hadn't been touched since 1960 and was returning to the earth with great enthusiasm. Good work. The kind that tired the right parts of you and left the rest alone. Boone came to every job, sat in the truck or sat in the yard or wandered politely between workers and got petted by whoever needed a break. Two of the guys from the church project started bringing extra treats. One of them, an older man named Gerald, who had been renovating that church for 3 years, said Boone was better for morale than the coffee. Garrett didn't disagree. Evenings he made dinner. Real dinner. Nora had left a recipe box, dark blue tin with her handwriting on index cards in neat rows. He cooked from it. Every night. Different card. It was the closest thing to a ritual he had. Wren always asked which card. Beckett always ate everything on his plate and then looked to see if there was more. It wasn't happiness. Not yet. It was something quieter. The architecture of a life being built from scratch. The feeling of walls going up one board at a time. But it was theirs. The letter from the Ashford family lawyer arrived on a Friday. 52 days until the hearing. Garrett read the number 3 times. 52 days for the court to decide if a former Army Ranger who owned a secondhand truck and a recipe box and a husky could provide a stable home for 2 children who were already quietly doing exactly that. He was standing in Floyd's shop when he finished reading. Floyd was at the forge. The heat was significant. The noise was useful, the kind of background roar that made thinking cleaner. 52 days, Garrett said. Floyd didn't turn around. Enough time. For what? For you to stop being afraid of a hill. Garrett folded the letter. put it in his jacket pocket. Nora was sick for 2 years, he said. She told me I'd find a granary. She said when I saw it, I'd know how much she trusted me. He looked at the fire in the forge. She said those exact words. How much she trusted me. Yeah, and I still haven't gone up there. Floyd finally turned around, looked at him steadily. Why not? And Garrett, who had cleared buildings and pulled teammates from burning vehicles and stood at attention while generals pinned things to his chest, didn't have a good answer for that. Because he knew. He knew whatever was up that hill was going to break something open inside him, was going to ask something of him he wasn't ready to give, was going to mean that Nora had seen this coming, had prepared for, it had spent the last years of her life building something for him while he'd held her hand and thought he was the one taking care of her. And he wasn't ready for that. He wasn't ready to find out how much she had known. Tomorrow, he said. Floyd went back to the forge. All right. He drove up the hill alone. Boone was in the passenger seat, but that was alone for Garrett. Boone didn't count. Boone was part of the landscape of his body at this point, like his left arm or the dog tags against his chest. The road was unpaved past the second curve, steep enough that the F-250 complained about it. Oak trees on both sides bare now, their branches making a lattice against the gray October sky. Old stone walls along the property lines, the kind that New England built before anyone bothered with fences. The road crested the hill, and Garrett stopped the truck. He sat there for a full minute, just looked. The granary was large, much larger than he'd expected. 3 stories of old timber framing the wood gone silver with age, a roof that curved like a barn, but taller, more vertical, built to hold weight, built to last, built by people who believed in permanence. That wasn't what stopped him. What stopped him was the front face of the building. Floor to ceiling, edge to edge. Every inch of exposed timber, every beam, every board between the windows covered. Dog tags. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Aluminum, mostly the simple military kind, but also handmade. Hand-stamped. Hanging on fine wire and thin cord, in what looked in places like the kind of paracord Nora used to wind into bracelets for the kids when they were small. Each one with a name, a date of birth, a date of death. The wind moved through them, gentle, patient, and they rang against each other, not loud, not sharp, just a sound like distant chimes, like the quietest possible version of something that refused to be forgotten. Garrett got out of the truck. He didn't decide to. His feet just took him. Boone dropped down from the passenger side and fell into step at his left heel without being asked. He walked to the wall, put his hand out, touched the nearest tag. Robert A. Eklund, November 4th, 1943, March 7th, 1969. The next one, Calvin James Pruitt, June 22nd, 1951, October 14th, 1971. He moved along the wall, reading, touching, his throat doing something he was not going to acknowledge. These were not famous names. These were not the names on monuments or memorials. These were not the names anyone was marching for. These were the ones who'd slipped through, who'd died in hospitals or in silence or in VIA waiting rooms, who'd come home and then slowly hadn't made it, who'd never made the news because individual grief rarely does. Nora had found them, every one of them. He didn't know when, didn't know how. He thought about the times she'd been on her laptop late at night, the phone calls she took in the car, the trips she said were about work that he hadn't questioned because he trusted her and she was always where she said she'd be. She'd been here, in these records, in these archives, in the phone trees of veterans organizations, in the back files of small-town newspapers, and wherever else a woman with her particular combination of legal training and stubbornness went when she needed to find people no one was looking for. 3 years of it, while she was sick. He found his own name near the center of the wall, Garrett T. Malone, his birth date, but no death date. And next to it, where a date should have been a small brass shape, not a date, a symbol, A house, the kind a child draws. Simple. 4 walls, a door, a triangle roof. And below it, burned into the wood of the granary wall in Nora's handwriting, the only words on the whole building: for the ones who came home, and for the one who stayed. He sat down on the ground in front of it, right there in the dirt, in his work jacket and his Danner boots, and with his dog tags cold against his chest. Boone lay down next to him, not dramatic about it, just lay down. Garrett pressed the back of his hand against his mouth. There was an envelope nailed to the center post of the granary door. Small, white, his name on it in her handwriting. He didn't reach for it. Not yet. The wind came through the dog tags. That sound. He sat with it for a long time. The October light moved across the hill. The shadows of the bare oak trees stretched and shifted. Somewhere far below he could hear the town. A truck, a school bell, the distant bark of someone else's dog. And hear the tags. And Nora's voice, which wasn't a voice anymore, just a pressure. Just the knowledge that she had done this for him while she was dying so that he would have something to come to when the thing he was afraid of finally arrived. She had known it would arrive. She always knew. He reached for the envelope, opened it. Inside, a key, old brass simple, and below it a handwritten note. 3 lines. Go to Burlington, 47 Church Street. Suite 12. Ask for Ruth Calloway. She's been expecting you. I love you. I built you something. You'll know what to do with it. He read it twice. Then he put the key in his chest pocket. Against the dog tags, against his skin. Stood up. Boone stood up with him. The granary wall rang quietly in the wind behind them. All those names, all those people. Present. All right, Garrett said. Quiet. To Nora. To the hill. To whatever came next. All right. He walked back to the truck. The key was warm by the time he reached the door. Burlington was a 4-hour round trip. Garrett made it in 3.5, which was not something he'd planned, which was just what happened when you had a brass key in your chest pocket and 200 miles of Vermont highway and nowhere to put your hands except on a steering wheel. Boone rode shotgun, ears up the whole way, watching the road like he was navigating. Maybe he was. Suite 12 at 47 Church Street was up a narrow staircase above a bookshop. The staircase smelled like old wood and cold air, and something Garrett couldn't name that wasn't entirely unpleasant. The door at the top had a small brass plate. Ruth Calloway, Estate and Trust Law. Garrett stood in front of it for a moment. Boone sat down next to his left boot. Patient, reasonable, waiting for the human to catch up. Garrett knocked. Come in. Ruth Calloway was 58 years old, small, precise, silver hair cut short in a way that looked like a choice rather than a compromise. Reading glasses on a chain around her neck. A desk covered in files so organized they looked like they were afraid of her. She looked up when he entered, looked at him the way you look at something you've been waiting for. Mr. Malone. Not a question. A confirmation. Yeah, sit down. Your dog can come in. Boone was already in. She had known Nora for 7 years. Not socially, professionally. Nora had come to her in the 2nd year of her illness, not the first, which Ruth noted, which told her something about the woman with a specific and unusually detailed set of instructions. She was very organized, Ruth said. Neutral. But something in her voice made it mean more than organized. She was, Garrett said. She told me you would come when you found the granary. She said. Ruth paused, opened a folder, read from it directly. He'll sit in front of it for a while first. That's okay. That's Garrett. He processes by being still. The room was very quiet. Garrett looked at his hands. She was right. She usually was. Ruth set the folder down. Shall I explain the trust, please? The Ashford Malone Private Trust. Established 14 months before Nora died. Assets $200 million. Source: the personal estate of Eleanor Weston Ashford, Nora's maternal grandmother, who had separated her assets from the Ashford Family Trust in 1989, who had done this quietly, deliberately. After watching her son-in-law Douglas run the family foundation for 3 years and reaching a very specific conclusion about his character, Eleanor had died in 2019, left everything to Nora directly, not to the family, not through the family, to Nora in a document that Douglas's lawyers had tried to challenge and failed to challenge because Eleanor's own lawyers had been Ruth Calloway for the preceding 11 years, and Ruth Calloway did not leave gaps. Nora had never touched the principal, never spent it, never mentioned it. Not to anyone, not even Garrett. She wanted you to prove something, Ruth said. Not to her, she already knew. She wanted you to prove it to yourself. Prove what? Ruth looked at him steadily. That you could provide for your children without it. She closed the folder. She said, and I'm quoting directly, Garrett will feel like the money means he wasn't enough. I need him to know he was already enough before he finds out about the money. Garrett said nothing. His jaw moved once, just once. She thought of everything. Almost everything Ruth said. She knew Douglas would file for custody. She prepared for that too. And then Ruth Calloway placed a second folder on the desk. Thicker, heavier, the kind that has weight in it before you even open it. There is a condition on the trust, she said. You have to open the granary. With the key Nora left you. I haven't opened it yet. I know. She said you'd go there twice. Ruth almost smiled. The first time to look, the second time to be ready. Garrett looked at this folder. What's in there? Evidence, Ruth said simply. 61 pages of it. For when you need it. The custody hearing. Yes. He sat with that. Outside the window, Burlington went about its afternoon. Traffic. Pigeons. Someone laughing on the sidewalk below. The ordinary texture of a world that didn't know it was being watched from a law office where a dead woman's plan was still unfolding like a slow, careful tide. She did all this while she was sick. Yes, while I was home, while I thought I was taking care of her. Ruth looked at him with something that wasn't pity, something more careful than that. You were, she said. That's not a contradiction. He drove back to Calder in the dark. Boone slept, which Boone almost never did in the truck. But he slept now, head on the center console, warm weight against Garrett's arm. 52 days. The number lived in Garrett's chest like a stone. 52 days until a judge decided whether a man with a second-hand truck and a converted equipment shed could give two children what they needed. Except he already was. That was the thing. He already was giving them what they needed, and the court was going to look at bank accounts and addresses and decide on those terms. Not on the terms of the morning Beckett had gotten up early to shovel the path to the truck before Garrett was awake. Not on the terms of Wren's drawings, which had gotten lighter in the last 3 weeks. Not on the terms of Boone, who slept in the doorway between the kids' room and the main room every single night because that was where he'd decided he needed to be. None of that showed up in a legal filing. Garrett's hands tightened on the wheel. He thought about Douglas Ashford standing on that porch. Wool coat, lawyer, notary, all that preparation, all that certainty, and underneath all of it, money. Two children being valued at what they could deliver, not at who they were. Nora had known. She had known this was coming, and she had spent 3 years on a hill in Calder, Vermont, building something with her own hands while she was sick to make sure he wouldn't face it alone. You'll know what to do with it. He hadn't known, not yet, but he was starting to. Calder in late October had a particular quality. The color was going out of the leaves. The hills were going brown and gray. The mornings came cold and stayed cold, and by 4 in the afternoon, the light had already started its retreat. But the town itself had its own warmth. There was Gerald from the church project who started stopping by Floyd's shop in the evenings with venison from his cousin's property. There was Mrs. Aldrich, who called twice a week to tell Garrett something specific and good about one of the twins. There was the woman at the diner, Patrice, 50 years old, running the counter since her mother retired, who started putting a bowl of water outside the door for Boone without anyone asking. Small things, the kind that don't look like anything from the outside and are everything from the inside. Wren started painting, actually painting, not just sketching. Floyd had found in the back of the shop a set of watercolors in a wooden box that had been sitting in a crate since the previous tenant left. He didn't know how old they were. They worked. Wren looked at them the way a person looks at something that was already theirs and just needed returning. She set up at the corner of the shed's main room, a piece of plywood on two sawhorses, newspaper on the floor, and she painted. Houses at first, houses in different conditions, houses with broken windows, houses with new roofs, houses that were mid-repair scaffolding up visible improvement in progress. Then she started painting people. Floyd's hands at the forge, Beckett's feet in his school sneakers that were getting too small, Boone asleep in the doorway. Garrett's back at the kitchen counter reading a recipe card with the same focus he brought to everything. She wasn't painting what was wrong, she was painting what was there, which was different, which was better. Garrett noticed, didn't say anything. Just once when she left a painting out to dry, he stood in front of it for a while before bed. She'd painted the shed, their shed, but in her version it had window boxes with small flowers, and through the window, warm yellow light. Mom told me to look for what could be, Wren said from behind him. He hadn't heard her get up. Not just what is. He turned around. She was standing in the doorway in her pajamas, hair going everywhere, one sock on and one sock off for reasons that were her own. When did she tell you that? Last year, when we were looking at that old house on the highway, the abandoned one. Wren tilted her head. She said every building that looks dead is just waiting for someone to want it. Garrett looked back at the painting, the window boxes, the yellow light. She was right. She was usually right. Wren yawned. Except about pineapple on pizza. She was wrong about that. And then she went back to bed. Garrett stood in front of the painting for another 5 minutes. The man in the gray suit arrived on a Thursday. Not Floyd's kind of gray that was working, gray-weathered gray, the gray of someone who'd spent decades not caring what he looked like and looked better for it. This was expensive gray, deliberate gray, the gray of someone who wanted to be taken seriously before he opened his mouth. He parked a rental Audi outside the blacksmith shop and asked for Garrett Malone. Floyd pointed across the yard to where Garrett was stacking lumber. The man walked over, carefully, like the ground had not been cleared with him in mind. Mr. Malone, I'm Thomas Vale. I represent the Ashford family. Garrett set down the board he was holding, straightened. Boone appeared from somewhere. He always appeared from somewhere when a stranger arrived and sat down next to Garrett's left boot. Ears forward, not aggressive, just present. Thomas Vale looked at Boone, then back at Garrett. I'll be brief, he said. Appreciate it. My clients are prepared to offer a resolution that avoids the need for further court involvement. He reached into his jacket, drew out an envelope, held it out. $750,000, deposited within 30 days of a signed agreement. In exchange for number. Vale blinked. You haven't heard that? I've heard it. Garrett looked at the envelope. Didn't take it. The answer's no. Mr. Malone, I'd encourage you to consider. I've considered. He picked the board back up. You should head back to Burlington. Road gets icy after dark. Thomas Vale stood there for a moment, recalibrating. Men like him always recalibrated when the script didn't hold. The hearing is in 41 days, he said. My clients have resources you don't. This offer is good until the end of the week. Garrett stacked the board, picked up the next one. Doors open, Floyd said from the shop entrance. Meaning the gate, meaning the road. Thomas Vale left. Floyd watched him go, then looked at Garrett. $750's a lot of money. It's not enough. No, Floyd said. But I wasn't saying it should be. I was just saying. He went back inside. Dinner's at 6. Don't be late. That night was the night Garrett almost broke. Not dramatically, not loudly, not in any way the kids would ever know about. It was midnight. The shed was quiet. Wren and Beckett asleep in the back room, Boone in the doorway between. Garrett was at the table, Nora's recipe box open in front of him, not looking for a recipe, just holding the cards, reading her handwriting, heavy on the black pepper. Beckett doesn't like thyme, pick it out before serving. This one's for cold days. He spread them across the table. There were 47 cards. 47 small instructions for how to feed the people he loved. 47 pieces of evidence that she had paid attention, that she had seen her family the way a person sees something precious in detail, in specificity, in the particular knowledge that only comes from caring about something more than you care about being perceived as caring about it. He thought about the hearing, 41 days, sitting in a courtroom while Douglas Ashford's lawyers argued that a man who built his own kitchen table and cooked from his dead wife's recipe cards was an insufficient guardian for two children who were currently sleeping under a roof they helped repair. He thought about Wren's window boxes, Beckett's jaw, Boone in the doorway. And then he sat with the specific quiet terror of a man who has survived every external threat his life has sent at him and is now facing the only kind that can actually reach him. Not bullets, not fire, not orders that made no sense and had to be followed anyway. Losing them. That was the thing under all the other things. The house didn't matter. The money didn't matter. The hearing and the lawyers and Douglas Ashford's wool coat didn't matter. The thing that mattered was the possibility of walking into that shed tomorrow morning and Wren not being there, Beckett not being there, the doorway empty. He put his hands flat on the table, breathed. The door from the back room opened. Beckett, not running, not panicking, just up, standing in the doorway in his socks and his flannel pajamas, hair pushed sideways from sleep eyes mostly open. He looked at Garrett, at the recipe cards spread across the table. He didn't say anything. He crossed the room, pulled out the chair next to Garrett's, sat down. Boone got up from the doorway, came over, put his head on Beckett's knee. The three of them sat like that. No one spoke. The kitchen clock ticked. The wind outside did its usual thing against the eaves. Somewhere a branch knocked against the shed wall, familiar now. The same branch, the same knock. A sound that was starting to mean home in the way that sounds do when you've heard them often enough. After a while, Beckett picked up one of the recipe cards. Read it. This is Mom's handwriting. Yeah. She wrote, "Don't tell Dad it's not the Worcestershire sauce. He thinks that's the secret." Garrett almost laughed. Almost. What's the actual secret, brown sugar? Beckett nodded slowly, processing this information with the gravity it deserved. That tracks. Then he put the card down, didn't move, just stayed there. And that was it. That was the whole conversation. Because Beckett was 10 and he already understood that sometimes the point isn't to say anything. Sometimes the point is just to not let the other person be alone in the dark. Nora had been the same way. He looked at his son. Go back to bed. Yeah. Beckett didn't move immediately. Dad, yeah, we're not going anywhere. Garrett said nothing. I mean it. Beckett's voice was flat, certain. The voice of a child who had decided something and was not interested in revisiting it. They're not taking us, so you should probably sleep. He got up, went back to the room. Boone followed him to the doorway, looked back at Garrett once, then lay down. Garrett sat alone for another hour. Then he went to bed. He drove up the hill again before dawn. Garrett was up before 5, made coffee, stood at the small window and watched the sky turn from black to the particular dark blue that came just before light. Then he got in the truck. This time he didn't stop at the road's edge, drove right up to the granary, parked close, got out. The dog tags moved in the morning air. That sound, always that sound, now something he would carry in his chest for the rest of his life, whether he wanted to or not. He walked to the door, put the key in the lock, opened it. Inside the granary was not what he'd expected. He didn't know what he'd expected. Dust, maybe. Emptiness. The hollow interior of an old agricultural building that hadn't been used in decades. But Nora had been here, and Nora's version of anything was never hollow. The ground floor was clean, swept. A single work lamp on an extension cord plugged into an outlet that had been newly wired. He could see the fresh conduit along the baseboard. The lamp was still on, which meant she had wired it expecting someone to need it before they knew where the switch was. Of course she had. Three things on the ground floor. First, a filing cabinet, dark gray, 4 drawers, labeled in her handwriting. Second, a wooden table, simple, not his work, but solid, with a chair pulled up and a single envelope on the surface. His name, her handwriting. Third, a staircase, raw timber, new construction, leading up to the second floor. Garrett stood in the center of the space, took a breath. He opened the envelope first. Garrett. If you're reading this, you found the key, which means Floyd kept his promise, which means at least 2 people in this world do exactly what they say they're going to do. The cabinet has everything you need for the hearing. Ruth knows what's in it. Don't try to read it all at once. Let Ruth guide you through it. That's what she's for. Go upstairs. I made you something. The second floor was a room, a real room. Finished walls, the timber framing exposed but clean painted white between the beams. A window on the north side looking out over the hill, over the oak trees, over the valley below, where Calder sat in the early morning light like it had been there forever and planned to stay. Along one wall, shelves, filled with envelopes, organized by label in her handwriting. Wren, high school graduation. Wren, first heartbreak, you'll survive my love. Wren, wedding day. Beckett, college acceptance. Beckett, when things are hard. Beckett, when you're not sure you're enough. Envelopes for every phase of their lives. Every milestone she wouldn't be there for. She had written toward them anyway. She had written them as if she would be there in the way that a person can be there, in a letter on a shelf, in a room on a hill, waiting with all the patience of something that has nowhere else to be. Garrett stood in front of the shelves and could not speak. Not that there was anyone to speak to, but still, against the south wall, an easel, a canvas unfinished, a painting. He recognized the subject before his mind caught up with what his eyes were showing him. The granary, exterior, day, and in front of it 3 figures, a man in a field jacket, 2 children, one on each side, and next to the man's left leg, a dog, husky markings, one eye pale, one eye dark. She had painted them here. She had painted a moment that hadn't happened yet, from a place she was building for them in the months she had left. The painting wasn't finished. The sky was blocked in but not detailed. The figures had shape but not faces, as if she'd known she might not have time, or as if she'd left it that way on purpose, for him to finish. Garrett put his hand on the edge of the canvas. Didn't touch the paint, just the frame. All right, he said. The word came out rough, worn, pulled from somewhere below speech. All right, Nora. He'd been back in the truck for 20 minutes when his phone rang. Hadn't driven yet. Just sat with the key in his hand, in the morning light growing around the granary, and the dog tags ringing softly in the first real wind of the day. Unknown number, Vermont area code. He answered. Mr. Malone. A woman's voice. Not Ruth. Younger. Professional in the brisk, slightly apologetic way of someone delivering information they did not personally enjoy delivering. My name is Carol Briggs. I'm with the Ashford family legal team. He waited. I'm calling to inform you that Mr. and Mrs. Ashford have amended their petition. They are now requesting full and permanent custody of the minor children effective at the hearing date. They've engaged a child welfare consultant who will testify regarding the adequacy of the current living arrangement. Full and permanent. Not temporary, not partial. Full. Permanent. They've also requested the court appoint a guardian ad litem. The woman continued, which will require an additional assessment period. Who's the consultant? A pause. I'm not able to. Who's the consultant? Another pause, shorter. A Dr. Eleanor Marsh from Burlington. She specializes in thank you. He hung up. Boone looked at him from the passenger seat. Garrett looked back at the granary wall, all those names moving in the morning wind. You knew, he said, not to Boone, to the hill, to whatever Nora had left hanging in the air of this place. You knew he'd do this. The tags moved, a sound like agreement. He was at Floyd's shop by 7:30. Floyd was already at the forge. The heat was going. The rhythm of the place, the particular heartbeat of a workspace that had been operating the same way for 30 years, settled Garrett the way it always did. He stood in the doorway. Floyd looked up, rat his face, put down the hammer, sit down. Garrett sat on the bench near the wall, the one with the burn marks along the edge. Full and permanent, he said. Floyd sat across from him on an overturned bucket. No performance, no setup, just present. Tell me. So Garrett did. The phone call, the guardian ad litem, the welfare consultant who would come to the shed and assess whether a converted equipment shed was a suitable environment for children who were in that moment at school, doing exactly what they were supposed to be doing. Floyd listened to all of it. Then he said, "You went up to the granary this morning." And Garrett thought about the shelves, the envelopes, the unfinished painting. She prepared for this too, he said. Yes. The cabinet downstairs. Ruth knows what's in it. Yes, it's enough to stop them. Floyd looked at him steadily. Is that a question? No. Garrett laced his hands together. I think it's enough. I think she made sure it was enough. He looked at his hands. She did all of this while she was sick, while I was sleeping next to her every night thinking she was handling paperwork. She was handling paperwork. Floyd's voice was quiet. She was handling the most important paperwork of her life, and she did it the way she did everything, quietly, on her own terms, because she loved you and the kids more than she was afraid of dying. The forge popped. Something settled in the heat. She didn't trust me to handle it myself, Garrett said. That was the fear underneath the other fear, the one he hadn't said out loud yet. Floyd looked at him for a long moment. No, he said. She trusted you completely. That's why she made sure you didn't have to handle it alone. He paused. Trust isn't thinking someone can do everything by themselves. Trust is knowing someone well enough to know what they'll need and making sure it's there. The morning light came through the shop's small high windows, dust in the air, the smell of coal and iron and something older underneath. Garrett thought about Beckett sitting down at that kitchen table at midnight without being asked. We're not going anywhere. He thought about Wren's window boxes, yellow light through a painted window. He thought about Boone in the doorway. Every single night, the most honest creature he'd ever known doing the most honest thing available to him. Staying. He stood up. I need to call Ruth. Yes, you do. Floyd stood too, picked up his hammer. There's coffee on the bench by the door. Take it. You look like you slept 3 hours. I did. Take the coffee. He called Ruth from the truck. She picked up on the second ring. I heard she said, they sent me notice this morning. Full and permanent. Yes. The cabinet in the granary. Open the second drawer, she said. Look for a folder labeled If Douglas Files. 61 pages. A pause. You open the granary. This morning. He could hear something shift in her breathing. How was it? Honest, Garrett said. It was honest. Yes. Another pause. She worked very hard on that room. I know. They were both quiet for a moment. Two people on opposite ends of a phone line in a small Vermont town on a cold October morning, both missing the same woman and not saying so because some things didn't need to be said to be understood. Bring me the folder, Ruth said. We have work to do. On my way. He started the truck. Boone shifted in the passenger seat, resettled, put his chin on his paws. 41 days, but not empty days, not just waiting days. Days with a cabinet in a granary and 61 pages of documentation and a lawyer in Burlington who didn't leave gaps. Days with Wren's window boxes and Beckett's certainty and Floyd's coffee and the sound of dog tags in the morning wind. Days with a key in his pocket and a painting waiting to be finished. Garrett pulled out of Floyd's yard, turned toward the highway. Boone watched the road. The hills rolled past, brown and gray and beautiful in the way that October things are beautiful, not despite the dying back, but because of it. The bones of the landscape showing through, the essential shape of things freed from all the cover. He could see clearly now, all the way to the end of the road. The folder was 61 pages. Ruth had it open on her desk when Garrett arrived. 2 copies, one for her, one for him. Coffee already poured, which meant she'd known he was coming before he called, which meant Nora had told her that too. He sat down. Boone found a corner and settled into it with the quiet efficiency of a dog who understood that some rooms required stillness. Read from the beginning, Ruth said. Don't skip. So he read. It started in 2016. A single email. Douglas Ashford to his personal attorney. Subject line, re-Nora situation. The language was careful, the kind of careful that takes practice, the kind that sounds like concern and means control. We need to revisit the prenuptial arrangement. Lenora's attachment to the Malone situation has become a liability. If she continues on this path, the trust distribution schedule may need restructuring. The Malone situation. That was him. That was their marriage. Their children. A situation. Garrett set the page down. Picked it up again. Kept reading. Page 12. A contract draft. Never signed. Dated 2017. Prepared by Douglas's attorney. A separation agreement. Prepared for Nora. Offering her full reinstatement to the Ashford Family Trust, access to a property in Burlington, and a monthly stipend described as appropriate support for a woman of her standing in exchange for initiating divorce proceedings and agreeing to a custody arrangement that would give Douglas and Sylvia significant input into the children's upbringing. Significant input. The phrase sat on the page like something that had been trying very hard to look harmless. Garrett thought about 2017. Wren and Beckett were 5. He'd been back from his final deployment 8 months, learning how to sleep in a house without an exit plan, learning how to cook meals instead of rations, learning how to be the person who stayed. He hadn't known any of this was happening. Nora had been sitting across from her father in some office somewhere, reading this document while at home Garrett was teaching 5-year-old Beckett how to hold a hammer. She had not signed it, but Douglas had still tried. Page 29. A notarized statement from a woman named Patricia Holden, former administrative assistant to Douglas Ashford, retired 2021. The statement was 9 pages long. Ruth let him read it without speaking. Patricia Holden had worked for Douglas for 14 years. She had prepared correspondence. She had managed schedules. She had, over those 14 years, witnessed 3 separate attempts by Douglas Ashford to use his position to complicate Nora's access to independent medical coordination. When Nora was diagnosed, Douglas had controlled the primary insurance policy that covered her as a dependent of the Ashford Family Trust. He had, according to Patricia's statement, twice delayed processing administrative paperwork that would have expedited Nora's referral scheduling. Once by 2 weeks. Once by 6. Not enough to prove malice in a criminal court, but enough for a family court judge to read and understand the character of the man making the custody claim. Garrett set the page face down on his knee, looked at the window, breathed. Take your time, Ruth said. I'm fine. He was not fine, but he was functional, which was close enough. Keep going. Page 44. An email chain. Internal. Between Douglas and Sylvia, forwarded by mistake to Nora's personal email address in March of the year she died. Subject after. Sylvia. The children will need structure. Garrett won't be able to provide that long term. We should begin the conversation with legal sooner rather than later. Douglas agreed. But timing matters. Grief makes people pliable. We wait 60 days. Grief makes people pliable. 60 days. The eviction notice had come on day 45. They had been 5 days ahead of schedule. Garrett sat with that sentence for a long time. He thought about standing on the porch of the house on Dunmore Road with Boone at his heel, and Douglas in his wool coat, and his lawyer and his notary, all that preparation, all that certainty, all that willingness to look a grieving man in the face and call it estate management. He thought about Wren asking if they could bring her paints. He thought about Beckett's jaw. He closed the folder. Is this enough? Ruth looked at him. Yes, she said. This is enough. The hearing was on a Thursday. Garrett wore his good clothes, not the field jacket, clean pants, a button-down shirt that Nora had bought him 3 years ago, and he'd barely worn because the occasions for it hadn't come up in the life they had been living, which was a life that mostly happened outdoors. It fit the same. That was something. Floyd drove him, not because Garrett couldn't drive, because Floyd had said, "I'm driving," and Garrett had learned by now that certain statements from Floyd were not invitations to negotiate. Boone stayed home, which Boone did not accept without protest. The protest was sustained eye contact through the truck window that lasted until they turned the corner. Wren and Beckett were at school. Garrett had told them the night before. Sat them down at the kitchen table, the shed's table, the second-hand one, with the uneven leg Floyd had shimmed with a folded cardboard coaster, and told them there was a hearing today about where they lived and who they lived with. Wren had looked at him very directly. Are we coming? No. You're going to school. But school? He kept his voice even. This is my job today. Your job is school. She'd drawn something that night. He'd found it on the table in the morning. A small piece of paper folded once. He opened it in the truck. A drawing of the three of them. Simple lines the way she drew fast things, not detailed things. Him in the middle, her on the left, Beckett on the right, Boone at his feet. Underneath in her careful 10-year-old handwriting, we already live where we live. He put it in his shirt pocket, against his chest, next to the key. The courthouse in Burlington was old, stone, the kind of building designed to make you feel the weight of proceedings before you'd said a word. Ruth met them on the steps, gray coat, reading glasses on the chain, the expression of someone who had been in this building many times and found it neither intimidating nor comfortable. Just a place where things got decided. Morning, she said. Morning, Garrett said. She looked at him, at his shirt, at the line of his jaw. You look like a soldier, she said. That's good. I am a soldier. You're also a father. Today, that's the more important one. Floyd stayed in the hall. Garrett went in. The Ashfords were already seated. Douglas in charcoal gray, Sylvia in navy, 2 lawyers between them and 2 more behind. A consultant, Dr. Eleanor Marsh, sat to the side with a folder open on her knee. Reading glasses, conservative blazer. The practiced expression of someone accustomed to being the most credentialed person in the room. Garrett sat at the opposite table. Ruth set the folder on the surface between them. 61 pages. Plus Ruth's own documentation. 40 additional pages, bank statements, tax returns, character letters from Floyd from Mrs. Aldrich at Calder Elementary, from Gerald at the church project, from Patrice at the diner. Letters from people who had watched Garrett Malone show up every day and do the work and not complain and feed his children from handwritten recipe cards and raise 2 kids who said please and thank you and held doors for elderly people at the grocery store. The small evidence. The kind that doesn't look like anything from the outside and is everything from the inside. Douglas's lawyer opened. Precisely what Garrett had expected. Income figures, address, square footage of the converted equipment shed, number of enrolled school days, the absence of a permanent property. Standard. Clean. The argument of people who measured worth in verifiable numbers. Ruth let them finish. Then she opened the folder. And she began. She didn't perform it. That was the thing about Ruth Calloway. She didn't perform. She presented. Clearly. Sequentially. With the manner of someone who had arranged the truth in a particular order and was now sharing it at a sensible pace. The 2016 email, subject line Renora situation. The 2017 contract draft. The separation agreement prepared for a woman who had not asked for it and had not signed it. Patricia Holden's 9-page statement. 2 instances of delayed administrative processing. 2 specific dates. Names of the referring physicians. Timelines. The March email chain. Grief makes people pliable. We wait 60 days. Ruth read that last one aloud. She read it at normal speed. No drama. No emphasis. She didn't need any. The room did the rest. Douglas Ashford's face did not collapse. Men like Douglas didn't collapse. They recalculated. You could see it. The micro adjustments, the small tightening around the eyes, the way he leaned fractionally toward his lead attorney, and the attorney's response, a very slight, almost imperceptible stillness that meant there was no available rebuttal. Sylvia looked at the table. Not at Garrett, not at Ruth, at the table, at her own hands, at something that might have been the distance between what she thought was happening and what had actually been happening for the last 8 years, in the space between Douglas's plans and her granddaughter's drawings of houses getting brighter. Dr. Eleanor Marsh closed her folder. She didn't open it again. The judge was a woman in her early 60s, short white hair, reading glasses she kept taking on and off. She had the manner of someone who read people for a living and was not easily impressed by people who knew they were being read. She took 40 minutes. Garrett sat. He didn't look at the Ashfords. He didn't look at the lawyers. He looked at the middle distance, the way you look at something during a long wait, not seeing it. Just being present in his own body. Breathing. Steady. Boone wasn't here. But Garrett could feel the weight of him anyway. The ghost pressure of a dog who had spent 4 months sleeping in a doorway between the man and his children, because that was exactly where he needed to be. His hand moved to his shirt pocket, the folded drawing, the key underneath it. We already live where we live. Yeah, they did. The judge came back, sat down, looked at the room. The petition for full and permanent transfer of custody is denied, she said. Sole custody remains with the father, Garrett Thomas Malone, is established. She continued speaking. Something about the guardian ad litem process being closed. Something about the documentation presented. Something about the court's concern regarding certain communications introduced into the record and the possibility of further administrative review. Garrett heard it. He just heard it from a distance. Because the first sentence was the only one that mattered. Denied. Ruth put her hand on the folder, closed it. Neat. Final. She did not look at Garrett. She looked straight ahead. But the line of her shoulders had changed. Something released there. Thank you, she said. To the room. To the judge. To Nora, maybe, who had made this possible from a hill in Calder, from a room with shelves full of envelopes, from 3 years of quiet planning that nobody had seen coming. Garrett stood up. He did not look at the Ashfords on his way out. He almost did. He decided not to. Because the moment he'd been building toward was not here. Not in a courthouse. Not in front of lawyers. It was outside. It was the truck. And the highway. And Calder in the distance. And Boone waiting at the window. Floyd was in the hall. He looked at Garrett's face when he came through the door. Well denied. Floyd nodded once. The way old men nod when something happens that they expected but are glad to have confirmed. Coffee, yeah. They walked out of the courthouse into Burlington on a Thursday morning. Cold. Clear. The kind of November day that doesn't pretend to be comfortable. The sky, the specific shade of gray that means exactly what it looks like. Garrett stood on the steps for a moment. His breath made small clouds. He looked up. All right, Nora, he said. Quiet, not for Floyd, not for anyone. All right, he told the kids at the kitchen table that evening. After dinner, after dishes, after Boone had done his circuit of the shed. Same table, same shimmied leg, same smell from whatever was still warm on the stove. It's over, he said. We won. Beckett nodded once. Absorb this. Okay. Wren picked up her pencil, put it down, picked it up again. We're staying. We're staying. She nodded, very fast, like she was agreeing before she had a chance to feel the full weight of the relief. Then she started drawing. Beckett looked at Garrett. I want to learn how to do what the lawyer did. What do you mean? What Ruth did. Finding things, putting them in the right order. He thought about it. Making truth visible. Garrett looked at his son, 10 years old, already knowing what he wanted to make of himself. You'd be good at that. I know, not arrogant, just clear. The clarity of a kid who has been paying attention. Boone put his head in Beckett's lap. Beckett pushed it away. Boone put it back. Ruth called the following week. Are you at the granary? Numb. Go to the granary. Take the kids. There's something in the second drawer of the cabinet I didn't show you at the hearing. Ruth. It wasn't relevant to the custody case. It's relevant to everything else. A pause. She left instructions for when to show it. The instructions said after. After what? After you won. They drove up the hill on a Saturday. All four of them. Garrett and Wren and Beckett and Boone in the F-250, up the unpaved road through the bare oak trees. The light different now, November light lower, more golden in the afternoon, the kind that makes everything look considered. The granary came around the bend. Wren made a sound. Small. Not dramatic. The sound of someone seeing something for the first time that they'd heard described, but couldn't quite imagine until now. The dog tags moved in the wind. All those names. Mom made this, Wren said, almost a whisper. Yeah. Beckett got out of the truck first, walked to the wall, stood close, read tags without touching them. His lips moved slightly. Wren got out slower, came to stand beside her brother, looking up, all the way up. How many? I don't know exactly, Garrett said. A lot. These are people who died. People who served, who didn't get remembered the way they should have. Wren looked at the wall for a long time. She remembered them. Yes, even though she didn't have to. That's who she was. Wren nodded, slow, the way she nodded when she was putting something away inside herself for later. For a painting. For a moment she wasn't ready to fully feel yet. Beckett found his father's tag near the center of the wall. There's a house, he said, looking at the small brass shape beside Garrett's name. She put that there. Why a house? Garrett thought about how to answer that. Because I came home, he said finally, and she wanted to mark it. Beckett stood there looking at the small brass house for a long moment. What's in the second drawer? Let's go find out. The folder at the back of the second drawer was labeled in Nora's handwriting for after. Inside the trust documents he'd seen. Ruth's summary pages he'd read, and at the back, a single envelope. Not his name, not the kids' names, just one word. Granary. He opened it at the table on the ground floor. Wren and Beckett on either side of him. Boone between their feet. Inside, two documents and a handwritten letter. The first document was a deed, the granary property. Already transferred, the date was 8 months before Nora died. Transferred into the Ashford Malone Private Trust, which meant it was his, had been his, before he'd ever set foot here. She had given him the building before he knew it existed. The second document was a proposal, 14 pages, architectural drawings, project plans, budget estimates. At the top in her handwriting, the Malone Ashford Veterans Resource Center. He read it slowly. She had designed it. Not just imagined it, designed it with professional drawings. She'd hired an architect. Another thing she'd done without mentioning, and a floor plan that used the granary's 3 stories as naturally as if they'd always been meant for this. Ground floor intake and services. A space for veterans and their families to come without appointment. Comfortable, not clinical. Second floor, the room with the shelves converted to meeting spaces. A library, a quiet room. Third floor workspace. studios, a place for making things, and in the proposal a section on the exterior wall. The dog tags. These stay. They are the building. They are the reason for the building. Every program we run here runs in the name of these people, the ones who didn't make it home, and the ones who came home and still got lost. We. She'd written we, even knowing she wouldn't be there, because she intended him to say it, to carry it. We. Beckett was reading over his shoulder. Garrett felt him go still. She planned all this, Beckett said. Not a question. Yes. While she was sick. Yes. A long pause. She really didn't want to leave us with nothing. Garrett looked at the architectural drawings, the careful lines, the specific particular thought that had gone into every room, every purpose. No, he said, she really didn't. Wren had picked up the handwritten letter, the last page. She read it silently. Her eyes moved. Her face was doing the complicated thing, the thing it did when she was feeling several things at the same time and couldn't separate them. She handed it to Garrett. He read it. Garrett, you're going to want to argue with this. You're going to say it's too much, or you're not the right person, or you don't know how to run something like this. I know you. I know exactly what you're going to say. Here's what I want you to hear instead. You spent 16 years learning how to take care of people in the worst possible circumstances. You know what people look like when they're lost. You know what they need before they can say it. You know how to be in a room with someone who is not okay and not make it worse. That is a rare thing, Garrett. That is not a small thing. The trust will fund it. Ruth has the details. Floyd knows the property. The town of Calder already loves your dog, which means they'll tolerate you. Build it. Run it. Let it be the thing that makes the wall make sense. You're going to be a little afraid. That's fine. You've been afraid before. You kept going. Keep going. All my love. Nora, P.S. The painting on the second floor is unfinished on purpose. I left that part for you. You know which part. He sat with the letter for a while. The kids didn't rush him, because they were Nora's children too, which meant they understood that some things needed time to land. Boone put his head in Garrett's lap, and Garrett laughed. Actually laughed. Short, rough. The surprise kind that happens when something is both too much and exactly right at the same time. Okay, he said. To Nora, to the letter, to the building around them and the names outside, and the woman who had looked at the years she had left and decided to spend them building something that would outlast her. Okay, Nora, you win. By the time Beckett turned 11, the plans were already in motion. The birthday came in February. Garrett made the cake from one of Nora's cards, chocolate with cream cheese, frosting a notation in the margin that said Beckett always wants more frosting than the recipe calls for, just give him more frosting. So Garrett gave him more frosting. Beckett ate it without ceremony and then produced from his backpack a spreadsheet and a 2-page document he set on the table. The Nora Ashford Malone Scholarship, a program for children of veterans with financial need and academic potential, with projected budget, with selection criteria, with a 3-year funding timeline. He'd done it himself. I named it after Mom, Beckett said simply. I see that. She would have wanted it for kids who don't have enough. She was that kind of person. She was. Beckett looked at the proposal, then at his father. You should have known about the money sooner, so you could have stopped worrying. Your mom had reasons for I know her reasons. They were good reasons. He picked up the proposal. I still think you should have known sooner. Garrett looked at his son, this straight-backed, jaw-set 11-year-old person who had gotten up at midnight and sat at a kitchen table in the dark and said, we're not going anywhere, with the certainty of someone who had made a decision and was done revisiting it. You're probably right, Garrett said. Beckett nodded. I usually am. The town of Calder held a meeting about the granary in March. 43 people in the elementary school gymnasium, which was also used for voting and bake sales and the occasional debate about road maintenance. 43 people, and one dog who technically wasn't supposed to be there, but who Floyd had brought anyway, and who sat next to the door the entire meeting with such composed dignity that no one said anything. The vote on whether to support naming the granary a community landmark was 39-4. The four had concerns about parking. Boone was certified as a therapy dog that same month. The process had taken 4 months, several assessments, one incident with an assessment coordinator's lunch that was not Boone's finest hour, but was ultimately overlooked given his otherwise exceptional performance across every other evaluation. He worked Wednesdays, which meant every Wednesday morning Garrett drove up the hill and Boone walked into the Resource Center's intake room and lay down on the rug in the corner and waited. Veterans came in. Some of them talked, some of them didn't. Some of them just sat for a while in a room with a husky who looked at them with one ice blue eye and one warm brown eye and had no agenda whatsoever. Boone did not care about your record, your discharge status, your diagnosis, your number of deployments. He just wanted to be near you, which it turned out was frequently exactly what was needed. Floyd said once, watching Boone work from the doorway, "That dog knows more about people than most people do." Garrett said he learned from someone good. Floyd looked at him. "You're not talking about yourself." "No." "Yeah." Floyd drank his coffee. She loved that dog. He loved her back. They all did. Floyd looked out at the granary wall, the tags in the morning light. That was the thing about Nora. You couldn't help it. The Malone Ashford Veterans Resource Center opened on a Tuesday in May. No ceremony. Garrett had said no to a ceremony. Ruth had suggested a ribbon cutting. Floyd had suggested a brief gathering. Mrs. Aldrich from the school had offered to organize refreshments. Garrett had said, "Just open the door." So they just opened the door, which Beckett did at 8:30 in the morning. He pushed it open and stepped back and looked at the space inside and then looked at his father. "Looks good," he said, which was from Beckett a standing ovation. Wren had finished the painting. She'd taken her time with it. Weeks, going up to the granary in the afternoons after school, standing in front of the second-floor canvas with her good brushes, the ones Floyd had found, the ones that had been sitting in the back of the shop in a wooden box waiting. She'd added the faces, Garrett's face, looking not at the viewer but slightly past the way he looked when he was thinking about something large. Her own face, and Beckett's. And behind them, barely there, warm, translucent, the quality of light rather than of a person, Nora. Hands on their shoulders, not holding them back, holding them steady, the way she always had. The painting hung in the main hallway of the center, at the end of the entrance corridor, so that every person who came in walked toward it. Wren had titled it in small letters at the bottom corner. Complete. Douglas Ashford called once, 3 months after the hearing. Garrett almost didn't answer, but he did, because he decided that avoiding things was not the same as being free of them. Douglas, Garrett. A pause. The particular pause of a man who had prepared something and was now uncertain it was the right thing. "I want you to know Douglas." Garrett kept his voice level. "You don't have to say anything. I think I do." "Okay." Another pause. Longer. "She was better than us," Douglas said. Finally. Quietly. With something in his voice that had cost him something. She was better than the family she came from. "I knew that. I've always known that. I just didn't know what to do with it." Garrett said nothing. "The children," Douglas continued, They're doing well." "Yes, I can see that. From Ruth sends me the foundation updates." A long pause. "The scholarship program. The boy designed that himself." "Yes, he's extraordinary." "Yes, he is." Douglas seemed to run out of prepared material. What was left was just a man on the phone with his son-in-law trying to find his way back from a long distance with no good map. "Could we," he said, "at some point, come and see them?" Garrett thought about Wren's painting in the hallway, the light behind them, holding them steady. He thought about Nora's letter. Let it be the thing that makes the wall make sense. He thought about 2 kids who had a grandmother and a grandfather, and who might, given time, given good behavior, given a slow and honest rebuilding benefit from knowing that not everything that had been broken had to stay that way. That's not my call to make, Garrett said. That's theirs. Yes. Douglas's voice was quiet. Of course. I'll tell them you asked. Thank you. He hung up, looked at Boone. Boone looked back. Yeah, Garrett said. I know. The evening of the center's first full month of operation, Garrett went up to the granary alone. After dinner, after Beckett's homework and Wren's painting, and Boone's circuit of the property, and the familiar settling of the shed into its nighttime sounds, he drove up the hill, parked where he always parked now, got out, left Boone in the truck this time. Boone watched through the window, ears up, patient. The granary was lit from inside, the motion sensor lights Ruth had insisted on. Practical, warm, the windows glowing from within, and the dog tags. Outside, in the evening light, all those names. He walked to the wall, stood in front of it. He wasn't looking for his tag. He knew where it was. The small brass house beside it. The dates that weren't dates. He was just looking at all of it, at what she had built. Not the trust, not the legal documents, not the 61 pages or the architectural plans or the scholarship proposal or the naming of a foundation. This wall, this specific thing she had made with her own hands in the last 3 years of her life, driving up a Vermont hill by herself with a bag of supplies and whatever strength she had that week, hanging one name at a time. Not for recognition, for the names. Because they deserved to be somewhere. Because every person who had served and struggled and come home or not come home deserved to be somewhere that remembered them. She had thought that, she had felt that, and she had done something about it. He put his hand on the wall, on the wood between two tags. You made something good, Nora, he said. Quiet, for her, for the hill, for the names. I'm going to take care of it. The wind came through. The tags rang. That sound. Always that sound. Like the world's quietest bell. Like the least dramatic and most permanent sound he had ever heard. He stood there until the cold got serious. Then he walked back to the truck. Boone moved into the passenger seat from wherever he'd been draped across the center console. Let's go home, Garrett said, and drove down the hill, back through the bare trees, back through the dark Vermont evening toward the lights of Calder where his children were waiting, where the shed had window boxes, now real ones installed last month, with small, cold, hardy plants Wren had chosen and Beckett had researched, and where the recipe box was on the counter, and the fire was going, and there was a doorway Boone would sleep in all night without being asked, because that was where he was needed, and he knew it. On the second floor of the granary, in the room with the shelves, the painting called Complete caught the last light of day through the north window. Garrett and Wren and Beckett, Boone at their feet, and behind them barely there. Warm, present, the light. Garrett had painted that part himself. He wasn't a painter. He had no training. He had stood in front of the canvas for 40 minutes with a brush he didn't know how to hold properly, and he had added the light behind them. Not a person, not a face, just the quality of something that remains when everything else has changed. Warmth. Behind them, holding them steady, the way she always had. The painting was complete, so were they.